We have to think about drugs the way that we have thought about sex for a long time. Abstinence only has never been effective. You cannot save the world through abstinence.
Hasn't worked.
People have kind of like a very simplistic idea of the dealer is this evil actor who's poisoning their customers, when in reality, none of them have a clue as to what they are actually selling.
So they don't know if it's tainted drug supply or not.
No, they have absolutely no idea.
How did you gain the trust?
The moment we stepped into his car, there was a police raid. I was handcuffed to this man. The handcuffs were clinking because I was shaking. The entire block had come out to see what was happening. That's the block that I ended up living in for 4 years.
And the story spread?
Right.
I want to get back to how fentanyl changed things.
I always insist, fentanyl is a worse drug than heroin. Within 2 or 3 hours, all of a sudden they're getting dope sick. Dope sickness, opioid withdrawal, is a torturous experience. A form of torture that you don't wish on your worst enemy.
What can we do?
I think we have to work with the supply chains that already exist. We have to work with
crazy.
People who sell drugs. I call what I do supply side harm reduction.
Forgive me, I might be jumping ahead here, but if you're going to legalize certain drugs, I was a drug addict for over 35 years, and I have been around and helped and worked with people using substances for the last 15 years, and this, hands down, is the most eye-opening conversation about drugs and drug supply that I've ever had. Fernando Montero is a Columbia University anthropologist who actually lived, now get this, he lived among drug dealers in Kensington, Philadelphia, to understand how America's street drug economy really works. We talk about everything. How fentanyl took over, spoiler, the truth will blow your mind. And it's now the reason why Xylazine is growing across the country, why the war on drugs keeps making things worse, and his groundbreaking idea, now keep an open mind, of training drug dealers to save lives. It's one of the most informative and powerful conversations I've ever had about addiction and drug use. Please watch and share this podcast. As the war on harm reduction grows, everyone needs to hear it. Thank you very much for joining us. And you are a research scientist, Columbia University.
That's correct.
And what areas?
I'm a medical anthropologist. I work in public health, right? So I essentially combine the study of drug use and the study of drug selling to examine transformations to the drug supply in the United States and health outcomes associated to those transformations.
So drug use is understandable, but drug settings, are you location by city or location such as Kensington, which is an open air drug market?
Yeah, most of my research has been in Kensington.
Oh,
so
wow.
I lived in Kensington for 4 years in a block where many of my neighbors sold heroin and cocaine at the time, right? This was the pre-fentanyl era.
Right.
I moved to New York in 2012, but I was only an hour away, so I was coming back constantly, right? I had lived on one block for 4 years, so still had a lot of friendships there. I still have a lot of people that I know from back in the day. So that is still the corner where I do most of my research on the selling side of things.
Yeah. Right? And you actually went and lived in Kensington. That's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. We definitely found out a lot that we did not know about how drug markets work in this side, this region.
Let's
right?
go there. What was the, or not the, but the things that you saw that you didn't expect?
It's interesting because we went in not really knowing how drug markets in this region are organized, right? Like we went in kind of with the same ideas that many other people have. People have kind of like a very simplistic idea of how drug markets generally, or drug supply chains generally work, right? We have the idea of like the super centralized cartel that has a very clear economic logic,
Right.
With a very hierarchical
Supply chain.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have this idea that's completely the opposite of like the dealers who are kind of individual, profit-obsessed, evil actors who are running around doing whatever they want in completely disorganized fashion, right?
Right.
So we have the super organized, centralized cartel and the super decentralized, disorganized dealers. And we don't really know actually how things actually work, right? I mean, we found that there's kind of a combination of both things really, but there is a consistent organization in the drug market in Philly with very clear hierarchies. Like every corner works essentially the same way.
Right.
There's some flexibility to the roles, but the hierarchies are very well established.
Yeah. So you have very organized drug dealers that is primary distribution.
Yeah.
And I'm just assuming here. And then you have street dealers who are, some are profit motivated, but others are probably just motivated because it's how they can afford their addiction.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I saw so many people arrive from Puerto Rico. Most of my neighbors were Puerto Rican, right? And I saw so many of them arrive from Puerto Rico and look for jobs in the catering industry or in the flower industry. They would spend months looking for a legitimate job. They had to feed their family or send money back to Puerto Rico, right? After 3 or 4 months, they were desperate, and the corner was right there waiting for them, right? So they just eventually got sucked into the corner. And everybody gets arrested once they start dealing. Within 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you get arrested. Once you have a dirty record, that's it. You can't dream of having a legitimate job, right? So the drug economy sucks you in even further.
So now it's a forced career, if you will.
Essentially, you have literally no other option, and it's almost always a last resort.
And we have created that
As
a society.
Absolutely. Inequality, poverty, lack of educational opportunity.
Right.
100%.
And people don't get that. They think it's, the evil, I'm going to make lots of money. It's, no, I'm trying to survive.
Yeah.
And this is the only opportunity that I have.
And then we have all kinds of other myths that latch onto those, right? Like the idea that the dealer is this evil actor who's poisoning their customers, who's responsible for, let's say, the fentanyl that they're selling, when in reality we found out through this study of local hierarchies that dealers have no idea what they're selling. Nobody at the retail level, all levels of the retail hierarchy, none of them have a clue as to what they are actually selling.
So that's the distribution level.
Yeah.
And maybe even mid-distribution doesn't know. And it's coming in.
Yeah.
It's being given to the retail level.
Yeah.
Who's just making money.
Retail has no idea.
And they don't know if it's a tainted drug supply or not.
No, they have absolutely no idea. I mean, let's say that the person who occupies the highest role at the level of the drug corner buys their supply already prepackaged in the lowest denomination packets from a wholesaler who's actually doing the mixing, who doesn't even live in the neighborhood. They live out in the suburbs. And I have yet to see a DEA report that talks about that level of the supply of the wholesaler, a journalistic report, even fiction.
Right.
Really
well, that's where I was just going because, when you see a movie, they usually, you go into a crack house and, there's a bunch of people in the kitchen with scales and baggies and they're mixing and that's not realistic.
Absolutely not. Definitely not happening in Kensington very often. It's generally happening miles away in a place that gets no attention, right?
Well, it makes sense because that is easier to get the drugs transported to where you're going to make sales.
Right.
And you can control it better.
Right.
And I'm sure, so I have 30 years sober and I'm flashing back to my days. Some people do cut the drugs so that they can get a little more from it.
Right.
So I'm sure that happens at some level, correct?
Right. I mean, the wholesalers are definitely
cutting, but the retail level,
the retail, it's too complicated. It's expensive, right? They have, it's a whole enterprise to figure out.
So I'm thinking my background is methamphetamine, which you could cut with vitamin B.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So fentanyl and all this, you probably just can't cut with vitamin B.
They do add that vitamin D, actually. That's a common diluent. Yeah, but it's just too complicated for the retailers to do that. Like, it's too costly and too complicated.
Yeah.
They prefer to just buy everything already prepackaged from the wholesalers. And that's also how it's just worked for decades.
So
they don't need to bother with that, with the
what
remixing.
next comes to mind is, how did you gain the trust?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, because what happened is I started going out with an organization called Prevention Point.
I know, we did a documentary.
Yeah, they're wonderful, right?
Wonderful.
We did outreach with them for several weeks, and then my former boss, Philippe Bourgois, who's a medical anthropologist who taught me basically everything I know about drugs, he and I would go out and walk around the neighborhood trying to, start a conversation with people who were out in the street.
Yeah.
And one day we finally struck conversation with this man who was a monolingual Spanish speaker, right? We had a lot in common. And it was just a friendly conversation about the history of the neighborhood, how I was growing up there. He was evidently selling drugs, right? And we spoke with him for several hours, and then he offered us a ride to the subway. It was like 8 o'clock at night. It was December, it was cold. And the moment we stepped into his car, there was a police raid.
As homelessness grows, people are getting frustrated and they're pushing for laws that criminalize homelessness, which will only make the problem worse. Invisible People reaches more people, educating them on homelessness than all other homeless sector nonprofits and campaigns combined. But we do it on a limited budget. We don't have the funding they do. We are mostly funded by individual donations. And now that the economy is struggling, individual donations are disappearing, and we need you. I get it, you might not have the money to donate. Many people are struggling right now. Please share our content, share our videos. It really matters. And if you do have some funds and want to help be part of the solution to solve homelessness, please visit invisiblepeople.tv/donate. Our important work stops without you.
The moment we stepped into his car, there was a police raid. This man was pretty high up in the local hierarchy. He knew not to have anything in his possession that could get him in trouble. The police frisked us, treated us very badly, right? Like I got called racial slurs. I'm a foreigner. To me, that was actually kind of shocking, right? I always thought the movies were just a caricature.
So that part is true.
It's worse than the caricature.
Oh, okay.
It's worse, definitely worse.
Right.
I was handcuffed to this man, right? It was cold, I was nervous, the handcuffs were clinking because I was shaking. But they finally let us go, right? But at this point, the entire block had come out to see what was happening, right? Everybody realized that we're not there to make trouble, right? That we weren't informants. And that definitely helped build trust, local trust.
Yeah.
That's the block that I ended up living in
and
for 4 years.
the story spread.
Right.
And then you're one of the neighbors.
Absolutely. And then, that's one of the advantages of anthropology. You live in a place and become, one of the neighbors. So
immersive.
Yeah. So that helps build trust little.
I have very little knowledge of anthropology, but that makes sense. And you said something earlier that you started this back pre-fentanyl, or just when fentanyl was coming in?
Yeah, so this thing that I just told you, that police raid, was in December 2007.
Okay.
So that's when we started, and this was the height of the heroin era. Philadelphia had the purest and cheapest heroin in the country in those years. Fentanyl started coming in late 2012.
And it changed everything.
Absolutely, yeah.
And now we're seeing Trank and some other... Can you tell us about the drug supply, maybe give a timeline even, and how it has changed?
Yeah.
Both addiction and maybe even policing and housing and support?
Yeah. So this is where I become a nerd, because I love talking about the history of the drug supply. Yeah, one of the most interesting things about the heroin era is that the United States was split into two during those years. The East Coast and the West Coast had very different types of heroin. The East Coast had a powder form of heroin that was Colombian in origin.
Right.
People called it China White, even though it was never Chinese. It was coming from Colombia. Yeah. The West Coast had a different type of heroin known as black tar, right?
This was it well.
Not a powder. It was not easy to handle. It was kind of gooey, waxy, solid. And, anthropologists studied people who injected drugs on either side of the country during those years, and they found that the differences in the material characteristics of the types of heroin that people were using were having a huge impact on HIV and hepatitis C rates among people on either side of the country. People on the West Coast had lower rates of hepatitis C and HIV than people on the East Coast, and that's because of black tar. So black tar...
But it's... please forgive my ignorance.
No, please.
I would think, Hep C and HIV is dirty needles.
Yeah, exactly.
So the one would make you so addicted you didn't care whether you had a clean needle?
This is the interesting thing, that black tar was such a complicated substance to handle that if you wanted to reuse a syringe or share a syringe, you had to flush it repeatedly with water to prevent the syringe from clogging, right? And you also by force had to use heat, fire, to dissolve the heroin in a solution.
Right.
Whereas that powder that we had on the East Coast was so easy to handle. You didn't have to flush the syringe repeatedly to reuse it. You didn't have to use fire. In fact, I have never, ever, ever seen anybody use fire on the East Coast, especially in Philadelphia, to prepare a heroin solution. And so the act of flushing the syringe repeatedly on the West Coast and using fire was preventing the spread of hepatitis C.
That makes a case for needle exchange. Right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Right there, So from my experience, I only smoked it. And I'm Los Angeles, and it was all black tar, where you take a straw and the tin foil and,
Yeah, and that's coming back, right?
Is it?
Yeah, because one of the things, that's another big difference between black tar and powder. Black tar was smokable. It was...
Right.
Scientists call it bioavailable. Yeah. It was bioavailable through smoking, whereas powder heroin wasn't. You would waste the substance. It would evaporate if you tried to.
When I was a kid, I had really bad allergies, and I had to get allergy shots. And that scared me away from needles and probably saved my lives. But then also, when I first took a hit of heroin, I mean, it's hard to describe, but it was so wonderful. But some people get sick. They throw up and then they never touch it again. And I've had friends that, try it and then they get so sick they never touch. And I'm like, you're lucky. Yeah, you're lucky.
Yeah.
Me, I immediately fell in love.
Yeah.
So anyways, West Coast, East Coast, white tar. Is the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that had that kind of difference in the types of heroin that were available in different parts of the country had everything to do with how fentanyl emerged and how it spread. Because fentanyl emerged as a powder. It could only really be introduced into the powdered forms of heroin we already had on the East Coast.
So that's why it took off in Kensington more so.
It took years for fentanyl to spread to the West Coast, where black tar was still kind of the dominant form of heroin, right? And you could not put fentanyl into black tar. In fact, this was tested by the DEA and then drug checking programs for years, and black tar was never found to systematically contain fentanyl the way that powder heroin did.
Right.
Yeah, it took like a whole set of other transformations for fentanyl to finally make an impact on the West Coast. It wasn't through adulteration of the existing heroin supply as it happened on the East Coast, right? So that's why it's important to kind of pay attention to like the material characteristics and the details of the substance that people are using, right? It's not enough to say that people are using heroin. That doesn't mean anything. There's different types of heroin with different chemical compositions, with different, the ability to adulterate the substance is completely different based on how it looks. They also come from different places, right? Yeah, and then Xylazine was a similar story because Xylazine also emerged as a powder adulterant. People actually get it in liquid vials.
Okay.
They dump the vial in a little plate, put it in the microwave, and it evaporates into a powder, right? And that's how it gets mixed
in. So let me ask you, and I want to get back to how fentanyl changed things.
Yeah.
But on what I'm seeing now, I didn't even know about Xylazine until I visited Kensington.
Oh.
Until I visited Prevention Point.
Yeah.
And the abscesses and the amputations.
Yeah.
I didn't even know about any of that.
Yeah.
Then when I started talking about it, other service providers across the country said, oh yeah, we have a case here or a case there, but nothing as prevalent as what is here in Kensington. So it's not spreading as fast that I'm aware of. Why is that? Again, I was a meth head. I did heroin to sleep, meth to keep up. And I remember watching a documentary about the meth supply, and that when it got better, more people got addicted. Right? There was like a documentation of a certain, I don't know if it was a Carteller brothers, you might know, if studying this, that the whole meth supply just became so much more potent that more people got addicted, and that's what created the crisis or epidemic. So how does, let's say you talked about fentanyl, now you have xylazine, which isn't, from my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, spread around the country that much.
Yeah, I mean...
It will be.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I told you that the story about how fentanyl spread unevenly, right?
Yeah.
Xylazine is also spreading unevenly, partly because it has, and slower, like you said, partly because it has a different way of spreading. Fentanyl, you actually needed to import it from Mexico, where it actually, is now predominantly produced. We can talk about how criminalization and prohibition of drugs created fentanyl as a problem, right? Fentanyl would have never happened if heroin had not been prohibited, right? The switch happened.
We'll go there. Finish this first thing. Finish this first thing.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, cancel the next podcast. We're going to be here for a while.
But if you wanted to get fentanyl anywhere in the United States, you had to import it from Mexico, right? Whereas xylazine was a local phenomenon. You can get xylazine from any vet. You can get xylazine, right? And then the wholesaler will mix it into the opioid supply, right? And so the spread happens kind of locally. You don't need this whole supply chain to import it, right? So when xylazine spreads, it's actually the idea of xylazine adulteration that's spreading, and not actually the substance coming from a place where it needs to be imported from, right? And so it's a spottier process.
Yeah. So going back to what you just mentioned, you said that it was criminalization of heroin, which is why fentanyl grew. And now the criminalization of fentanyl is probably going to do the same to drink. Because
exactly.
So tell me about
it. It already happened, actually.
Right. No, I'm connecting the dots. And as we're, just having a conversation, lighthearted, this is very serious stuff.
Absolutely.
People are dying about that. Yeah. And then we have a government that's saying, oh, you have to criminalize this more. Yeah. And by doing that, it's making it worse. And more people are dying. So the criminalization of heroin is why fentanyl came. Tell me about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So the reason producers switch from heroin to fentanyl is because fentanyl can be produced in a small room, requires a very small labor force, and because it's more potent, it requires less volume. You produce less volume and to satisfy a larger market, right? The only reason why you're trying to produce a substance that uses less volume is because it's easier to smuggle, right? And the only reason why you're trying to smuggle a substance is because it's prohibited.
Right.
Heroin instead required these very large poppy plantations that were very visible, right? So you don't want that if the substance is criminalized and prohibited.
Right.
It requires this huge labor force, which just means that more people are involved, more potential informants, just yet again, right? The production is a much more visible process. And those are the things you're trying to avoid if the substance is prohibited and criminalized, right? So without criminalization, it wouldn't even have occurred to producers to come up with fentanyl, right? Or to switch to fentanyl.
Oh, wow. So what, from your experience, can we do? I mean, at the supply level. Mm-hmm. So you hear this a lot. I hear it mostly San Francisco because I'm West Coast, where they're saying, get rid of the drug traffickers. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's a bad idea, right? But I also know if you get rid of the drug traffickers, people are going to figure out some other kind of substance. For example, in Alaska, people are using alcohol, and if you take away the alcohol, they go and start drinking Listerine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, well, let me put it this way. Are you for legalizing drugs?
100%, but in a very particular way.
Explain it.
Yeah.
It took me a while to get there, right? Yeah. I mean, I really wasn't prepared, but I have a lot of passion in what we're talking about. But, the only way you're really going to eliminate drug trafficking from the supply is by legalization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have 100 years worth of data to show that criminalization and prohibitionism does not work. They only make things worse, right?
Yeah.
Fentanyl, xylazine are all products of prohibitionism, the way that we just described. You know, sometimes some states like Oregon give decriminalization, a very limited form of legalization, decriminalization, a shot for 3 months or 6 months. And because it doesn't produce the immediate utopia that people are expecting from it, people freak out and say, this didn't work, let's go back to what has shown not to work for the past 100 years, right? It really is absolutely irrational and illogical that we keep going back to prohibition and incarceration just because they sound simpler.
Yeah, the other country I think is Portugal, right?
Yeah.
That is often highlighted as somebody that legalized.
And where supposedly it didn't work. When all the data shows that European countries are doing so much better in terms of like overdose prevention and infectious disease prevention among people who use drugs than the United States, thanks to their far more decriminalizing efforts, I suppose, or non-criminalizing efforts. I mean, so yeah, we have established kind of that criminalization has shown not to work. It has proven not to work, right? What I worry about is that sometimes we favor forms of decriminalization and legalization that just entail transforming drugs into like a commodity like any other and gifting the big business of drugs to big corporations or other corporate interests that we know, created the heroin epidemic and the overdose epidemic in the first place. Everybody knows about the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma kind of...
That wouldn't be smart.
Producing the overprescription of pain medications and creating the problem that this country has with opioids. So we have to think of more democratic, egalitarian forms of decriminalization and legalization. And this is where I have a potentially radical idea that makes me sound crazy in many places.
Oh, this is the crazy place to share it.
I think we have to work with the supply chains that already exist. We have to work with
crazy.
People who sell drugs. And I'm trying to start at the local level here in Philadelphia, figuring out how we can bridge people who sell drugs at the retail level.
You're talking at the distribution level?
Initially at the retail level.
At the retail level first.
Simply because that's kind of where the only place where we can start as anthropologists and public health researchers.
I can see that. They would be more open to it, where the distribution level, which is probably more managed by cartels, would be like, nah.
We'll see, right? We want to do the research, we want to go up the supply chain, but we're starting small. Also partly because that's the logic of
what would that look like? Forgive me, I might be jumping ahead here, but if you're going to legalize certain drugs at the retail level, you're taking business away from the distribution level. They're not going to be too happy.
Yeah, no, you have to be very careful. You have to understand how the market is organized. You can't go and ask a dealer to do things that their bosses aren't going to want them to do, right? Like, so you have to, we're trying to start slow. We're trying to be very realistic. Also, it's the nature of NIH funding. We're actually getting the NIH to fund this. The NIH miraculously decided to fund me for this initial project.
Oh, it's worth experimenting.
And, I had to propose something very realistic that would be feasible. So we're starting with building bridges between harm reduction organizations, like Prevention Point, like Savage Sisters, and people who sell drugs at the retail level, right? That's something that has never happened, right? Like when I lived in Kensington for 4 years, Prevention Point was doing a great job among the people who use drugs, but I never saw them approach a person who sells drugs. Not once. It didn't even occur to them to try to even have a conversation with a dealer.
I'm painting the picture in my mind.
Right. And I would speak to my neighbors and I would ask them, like, would you be willing to carry Narcan? To have naloxone in your house, 2 doors down from the drug corner.
To test your supply.
Would you be willing to test your supply? Would you be interested in drug checking? They would always say yes. Like, there's no way in which that could even harm my business. And there are some basic public health interventions that we can do right now that would not mess with the business element of drug selling that could have a huge public health impact.
So you got funding to research this?
And to do it, to train people who sell. in overdose reversal.
Because that is a crazy idea.
I know.
It
was not easy to get the NIH to fund this.
Bet, yeah.
It took many years, yeah.
Oh my God. But I can see it because right now we're saying, I'll go back to San Francisco, where they, we've got to go in and arrest all these people that are dealing drugs and get them off the streets. That's not going to work. It hasn't worked.
Yeah.
I'm not pleased for anybody who's going to cut this clip out of sequence. I'm not saying I support drug dealers. I'm saying we have to find a better way.
Yeah.
Because just arresting drug dealers hasn't worked.
It hasn't. And whoever gets arrested or killed just gets replaced by somebody else who's just as desperate.
Or on the retail side, like you said, those that get arrested, now they're stuck in that. They can't go and work someplace else.
No. And actually incarceration has shown to just produce more hardened criminals who are better at
Well, that's we're going to segue a little here. Is one of the things that really, there's a forced treatment and a forced incarceration movement now. And people think, oh, well, they're going to go into jail and get better. In fact, there's advocates who, did 6 months in jail and got sober, and they're saying everybody should go to jail because they'll get sober. There's so many ODs, there's so much drugs, and people go into jail. It's like a convention for criminals.
100%.
They don't come out rehabilitated. They come out with negative community or connections. They come out with, they don't come out better, I guess you got to say.
And in
right?
fact,
And they're going to go back to doing crimes and doing drugs. And now you have other trauma, and you have other trauma with the family. You don't even think about, okay, here's a father that's going in jail. Now the kids are by themselves, the moms are by themselves. They start doing drugs to cope. I mean, incarceration, never mind, you get it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the solution. It just makes things worse. Yeah, my mentor Philippe Bourgois calls jails and prisons gladiator schools. Many people who go into jail.
That's a good way to put it. I'm stealing it.
Kind of as regular people have to learn to be violent to survive in jail and prison, right? They come out with a predisposition to violence that they didn't have before, right? And like you say,
gladiator schools.
They're speaking to other people who sell drugs for 20 years almost exclusively. They come out knowing how to do it even better.
So most drug use in the United States was heroin. I mean, there's meth, there's crack, and everything else, marijuana, whatever. We're talking about. Then fentanyl came along. How did that change the addict? How did that change people? I would assume, I remember my first detox when somebody would come in off of a synthetic. They would tell them to go out and start using heroin and come back because the synthetic is so harder to kick. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if I just remember at the particular facility I was in, that's what they told people.
Yeah, I think fentanyl is actually very poorly understood, even though it's been around for 13 years now and it's such a big topic, right? Everybody now knows about fentanyl. It's so widely covered, and yet we know very little about it. I always insist that it's very insufficient to describe fentanyl as simply a more potent substance than heroin. I insist that you have to think about fentanyl beyond the question of potency. You have to think about how it changes all these, the details again, right, of how people actually use drugs, how it affects their withdrawal, their ability to kick the drug if that person is trying to get clean.
The desire or the need to maintain.
Yeah. And so that's one of the first things that we decided to study as a research team. How is fentanyl changing how people actually use drugs in their everyday life, right? Beyond the question of just overdose risk, right? Which is true. Fentanyl is more potent than heroin in that way, right?
Most of the people that I know that use fentanyl have been doing it for years. It's people that are just new to it, or they don't know what's in their drugs that are overdosing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you build a tolerance to it like to any other opioid. Millions of people use fentanyl in their everyday life, right? It's not poison.
Right.
It's just potentially dangerous. But so there's so many aspects to how fentanyl changes the way that people use drugs beyond the problem of overdose, right? And so, one of the biggest changes that fentanyl introduced is the fact that it has a very short effect compared to heroin, right? And that was a very marked change for people who were using opiates in places like Philadelphia in 2013, 2014.
Because you gotta use more often.
Exactly.
It's good for business.
Immediately, they started getting dope sick faster, and the withdrawal was worse.
Yeah.
Right?
I thank you for saying dope sick, because I that's something I wanted to come back to, because it's a conversation we cover in our documentaries a lot. But could you explain from maybe a medical perspective what dope sick is? Because it's one thing that I don't wish anybody to use drugs, right? But I wish that I had a way of explaining to people who never use drugs what dope sickness is.
Yeah. And the thing is, dope sickness, opioid withdrawal, is a torturous experience, as you know, right? Like, it's a form of torture that you don't wish on your worst enemy. And most people who are unhoused, like the people that I work with who use opioids every day, largely organize their day on the basis of trying to avoid withdrawal and stave dope sickness, right? And so fentanyl comes along, all of a sudden they're getting dope sick within hours, within 2 or 3 hours, when it's with heroin.
Probably a worse sickness.
Much worse, yeah.
Much worse.
Yeah, they describe it as much more severe. And so they see it as a problem of the fentanyl era. People sometimes assume that because fentanyl is quote unquote more potent than heroin, it means that it's a better drug, that is more satisfying and longer lasting. That is absolutely not the case. I always insist that fentanyl is a worse drug than heroin. It's very important to keep that in mind. The people who were there, who had been using heroin for 20 years, who had to endure that switch because they had no other choice, the supply changed and they had no option but to start using fentanyl, they always insisted that fentanyl was much worse. It didn't give you the holistic full body embrace that heroin used to provide you. It lasted only 2 to 3 hours. Right? People described it as a kind of much more localized effect, like a flushing feeling in the face, concentrated in the neck and the face, nowhere near as satisfying as the experience of heroin. Yeah. And in many ways, the incorporation and the addition of new adulterants like xylazine are a result of that. The new substances are ways to compensate for the deficiencies of fentanyl, for the ways that fentanyl is
xylazine lasts longer.
Yeah, xylazine comes in and all of a sudden it begins to stretch out.
One of the things that scares me or concerned me, and we did a documentary where a woman, she's sober now and bought her own house, but she had abscesses on the inside. So I've seen abscesses on the outside, but abscesses on the inside. And what I remember our first time here, and we've been everywhere. I'm pointing at Alex, producer, who's stuck with me for 6 years. We've been to a lot of different places, but it was the first time, and I've seen abscesses. We've been out with organizations like Savage Sisters, and it was the first time on Kensington where I saw an open wound down to the bone. And it was disturbing, and I remember pointing it out to her.
Yeah.
What gets me is that people believe addiction is a switch. Right? It's like people smoke cigarettes and they know they could die from it, but they can't quit. But they think, oh, okay, when you're doing hard drugs, you could just flip a switch. I don't think anything describes, you can see your bones because your flesh is rotted away. Mm-hmm. You know this is bad, but you keep doing it. That's the addiction is so hard, and forced treatment isn't going to help that.
Yeah, 100%. And see, like, one of the reasons why it's so important to look at the details of how people are using and how a new substance changes the way they use is because you realize how much the substance itself determines how people behave. Like, people aren't doing what they do because of individual responsibility or because of individual decision making. Like, the substance in many ways is forcing them to do that, right? Yeah. Because fentanyl lasts less, it means that people have to go and buy more and use more frequently. If you're using syringes,
they need more money, so they're boosting more shoplifting or whatever they're doing to get money.
Sharing syringes more frequently. That's because of the substance. It's not because of individual decision making. Well, also, structural inequality, which
Yeah,
means that they have less access to sterile syringes. That's why they have to reuse the syringe, right?
So we're running out of time.
Yeah.
No. Like I said, cancel Eric. I want to talk drugs. We don't need to talk law. Let's talk drugs. There's a war right now on harm reduction. Literally. I mean, there always has been, but now it's stronger than ever. I believe in treatment. I think treatment is important, but it needs to be connected with harm reduction and housing. Together, all three will produce the best outcomes, right? There's this movement, treatment only or treatment first. That's going to be a death sentence to people. Sarah and I just talked about that.
Yeah.
Talk about how forced treatment and this war on harm reduction is just going to, it's ridiculous. It's insane.
Yeah. I mean, we have to live with the reality that we have to think about drugs the way that we have thought about sex for a long time. Abstinence only has never been effective. You need birth control, you need prophylactics, you need condoms, right, to prevent the potential harms coming from the fact that people are going to have sex no matter what, right? Same thing with drugs. You cannot save the world through abstinence, right? People are going to use substances. People are going to use drugs. And they might start recreationally, and then all of a sudden they find themselves developing a dependence on the substance. They develop a disorder, and that's it. A person is trapped, and it's very difficult to get out of there, right? So you need, in addition to treatment options, you need to also engage in the types of things we have done with sex, right? The equivalent of condoms, the equivalent of birth control in the space of drugs is harm reduction, providing safe supplies for people to be able to use substances safely, doing drug checking so that people know what they are consuming and, you know, manage their consumption insofar as they can, right? Or at least for service providers and public health officials to be able to respond to what's actually in the substances to minimize the harms of their use, right? We need that, and we need the treatment options for those people who are ready to transform their lives, who have the support and the conditions to actually improve their condition, right? Not everybody has that. Not everybody is going to be able to get clean and all of a sudden be housed and get a job. A lot of people don't have access to the job, right? And we have to face the fact that in this country, just as in my country, I'm from Costa Rica, you know, like once a person has a dirty record, they cannot possibly get a job. Even if they really wanted it, they can't have it.
Well, we're going into a society where jobs are disappearing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's the lower end jobs that people rely on, right, that are disappearing, that are going to disappear first.
Exactly.
Right? I'd say we have a perfect storm of homelessness coming, but addiction is part of that.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, the cost of housing is growing. The wages are not growing. In fact, jobs are less, and it's going to trickle all the way down to Kensington on the street, where you have more people trying to escape using drugs, getting addicted, and then they're in the cycle. So,
yeah.
2 questions, and we'll close it out. In a perfect world, how do we fix addiction?
Well, like we were saying, substance use is never going to disappear, right? People are going to use drugs, just like people are going to have sex. So we need to provide people with the resources to minimize the potential harms from drug use. We need, of course, better treatment. We do need to solve the problems related to structural inequality that are driving substance use disorders in the first place and driving and creating drug markets in the first place. I do think that we need to think very carefully about engaging people who sell drugs as stakeholders in drug policy. You know, they are also going to be around. Just like people are going to use drugs, people are also going to sell drugs, and we need to think about that.
So that's an interesting paradigm. This is the first time I've heard it. It's settling with me on a positive side. Very similar. So my paradigm shift, same when I was in a managed alcohol. I was in a managed alcohol facility. And at first, you know, everybody's walking around with their 6 ounces of alcohol. And at first I'm like, something's wrong here. This is uncomfortable. But then when I thought about it, these people are the people that are dying of alcohol or Listerine outside. And now you have them inside around medical staff for them to get better, right? So I changed. And what I went to all that to say, at first, it's very, and I'm sure you get this a lot, but I think you're right. I think you're onto something. I mean, if you're really, I mean, we have two solutions. Arrest them, which somebody else is just going to replace. You're never going to totally get rid of the drug supply. Or start engaging them somehow. And I don't know how that looks. I mean, you're researching it. I want to stay in touch. We're going to do this podcast again.
Would love to.
Yeah, no, this is now the Fernando and Mark podcast. Every week we're going to talk about drugs.
I love nerding out about them. So,
I think you're onto something.
I hope so too. I mean, we're going to work very hard.
I mean, if we were really going to reduce drug use or make it safe, it makes sense. How does someone watching this and wants to know more, is there a website or is there some place they can go to learn?
We have a website. I mean, I call what I do supply side harm reduction. So if they Google that phrase and my name, things will come up. There is a webinar that I delivered at the Drug Policy Alliance, kind of explaining the idea behind supply side harm reduction and how it potentially can look in practice. So that's
how did that go over?
I think it went well. You know, it was a friendly audience, right? The people who attended,
like me, right?
Yeah, I wasn't exactly facing my enemies.
Yeah.
But still, there were some tough questions. So it definitely helped refine the ideas.
Oh, very cool, very cool. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us.
Thank you for inviting me.